Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this September 2, 2014 edition of Nightcast. We've got a lot of news for you tonight. Our opening story will go to Iceland, where the Bardarbunga volcano continues dramatic lava eruption. And then, yes, we do have the news on that second beheading of a U.S. hostage journalist. But first, this news that relates to the fourth seal. Volcano continues dramatic lava eruption in Iceland, the Bardarbunga volcano.
Effusive lava eruption that began early on Sunday near Iceland's Bardarbunga volcano was still spouting lava on Monday. Now, this eruption briefly caused the country to raise its ash alert level for aviation to its highest level. It produced lava fountains which were more than 50 meters high. This was downgraded when there was no ash detected.
And friends, while that continues in the background here, I'll just mention that the eruption began early on Sunday near Iceland's Bardarbunga volcano, and it's continued to erupt into Monday. At the weekend, lava fountains more than 50 meters, 165 feet high, prompted the Met Office in Iceland to raise the ash warning for aviation to red, the highest level. Later, it reduced the alert from red to orange, the next level saying the eruption was not creating ash. But, that's volcano Bardarbunga has been in and out of the news during the past several weeks. Friends, the dramatic story out of the Islamic State area. Islamic State kills U.S. hostage Steven Sotloff.
Following reports contain some disturbing images.
Steven Sotloff, before he was kidnapped. A freelance American journalist, he crossed into Syria a year ago and was seized almost immediately. Tonight, Islamic State jihadists posted a video online, much of it too gruesome to show, of Sotloff's apparent beheading by what appears to be a British jihadist who voiced this message.
I'm back, Obama, and I'm back because of your arrogant foreign policy towards the Islamic State.
Boarding Air Force One for Europe tonight, President Obama made no immediate comment, but the White House was quick to condemn the killing. This is the second U.S. hostage to be murdered by IS in Syria in 2 weeks.
If the video is genuine, we are sickened by this brutal act taking the life of another innocent American citizen. Our hearts go out to the Sotloff family.
Islamic State militants have been holding a number of Western hostages in northern Syria. Several European nationals were earlier released, reportedly in exchange for huge ransom payments. But in a recent video, IS threatened to kill Steven Sotloff if U.S. airstrikes continued. They did, but his mother made this desperate last-minute appeal. Now it seems in vain.
Steven is a journalist who traveled to the Middle East to cover the suffering of Muslims at the hand of tyrants. Steven is a loyal and generous son, brother, and grandson. He is an honorable man and has always tried to help the weak. We have not seen Steven for over a year, and we miss him very much. We want to see him home safe and sound and to hug him.
Sotloff's murder follows the beheading of this U.S. journalist, James Foley. It's believed to be by a British jihadist. Intelligence agencies have been working to try to establish who killed him, but so far no public announcement has been made. The Prime Minister was told about the latest video today. In a statement from Downing Street, he offered his condolences to the Sotloff family and said, IS terrorists speak for no religion. They threaten Syrians, Iraqis, Americans and British people alike and make no distinction between Muslims, Christians or any other faith. We have already been working hard, he said, to keep British people safe and we will continue to do all we can to protect our country and our people from these barbaric terrorists. There have been over 100 US airstrikes on Islamic State fighters in northern Iraq, largely halting their rapid advance. Britain has not joined in, only dropping humanitarian aid to refugees instead. But tonight, for the first time, Islamic State threatened in its video to murder a British hostage it's been holding. Two things are significant about this latest video from IS. It's clear that the recent US airstrikes that have driven back their fighters from the Mosul Dam and from overrunning Kurdish villages are hurting Islamic State. They can't fight those airstrikes militarily, so this is their way of hitting back. It's called asymmetric warfare. Then secondly, by threatening the life of a British hostage, this effectively drags Britain into the fight against Islamic State in the Middle East. When it comes to the West, the jihadists are making no distinction between America and Britain. The cold-blooded murder of the journalist Steven Sotloff will shock many around the world, but it's unlikely to deter the US and Britain from action against IS. It may even redouble it. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Friends, a White House spokesman did have comment following the release of this video today.
This is something that the administration has obviously been watching very carefully since this threat against Mr. Sotloff's life was originally made a few weeks ago. Our thoughts and prayers, first and foremost, are with Mr. Sotloff and Mr. Sotloff's family and those who worked with him. The United States, as you know, has dedicated significant time and resources to trying and rescue Mr. Sotloff. I'm not in a position to confirm the authenticity of that video or the reports at this point, obviously, since I just walked out here. But this is, if there's a video that has been released, it is something that will be analyzed very carefully by the U.S. government and our intelligence officials to determine its authenticity.
Friends, that was White House spokesman Josh Earnest. And as you heard him say, he told reporters today that U.S. intelligence experts would be analyzing the footage of that video to assess its authenticity. And related to that, the U.S. military has targeted the leadership of militant group al-Shabab in airstrikes in Somalia. The BBC's Dennis O'Carey reports that it's not clear if leader Ahmed Abdi Godane was hit in the strikes some 250 kilometers, 150 miles south of the capital, Mogadishu. And here with this report, again, is BBC's Dennis O'Carey.
Well, the U.S. military drone strike was targeting the top leadership of the al-Shabab, definitely. And what eyewitnesses are telling the BBC is that they heard 3 loud explosions. Others are saying there was a brief exchange of fire. But what they're also saying is that they saw helicopters lifting bodies. We're getting the number of 7. We cannot confirm who those 7 people were, but we are meant to understand that it was targeted at the top leadership.
And that top leadership, that name being bandied about, Dennis, Ahmed Abdi Godane, who is the al-Shabab leader, we still don't know yet, do we, whether or not he was part of those 6 that have been killed in this strike?
We know he has been on the U.S. target hit list for quite some time. We also are meant to understand that he was to be part of that convoy. What we can't confirm is whether he's one of those who's been killed by that drone strike. Remember, this is the second time that the U.S. are pulling this in the last 2 years, and whether this was successful or not, it's only a matter of time, and we'll be able to find out. And also to point out that this is coming a few hours before the African Union Summit here in Nairobi, where the al-Shabab and Somalia in general, including the president who was present in that summit, has been a point of discussion. And they're saying that indeed al-Shabab is a challenge not just in Somalia but to the entire East African region, and they still have the capability and the capacity to carry out more attacks.
Al-Shabab is a militant Islamist group allied to Al-Qaeda. It has also been linked to African jihadists like Nigeria's Boko Haram. Al-Shabab means the youth in Arabic. It wants to create a strict Islamic State in Somalia. It is thought to have up to 9,000 fighters, including children and foreign jihadists. It has targeted Kenya numerous times as revenge for counter-terror operations in Somalia. Its attack on Nairobi's Westgate Center in 2013 killed 67 people. Al-Shabab are deemed terrorist by US and UK and banned. African Union pushed group out of key Somali towns in 2011 and 2012. But Al-Shabaab are still dominant in many rural areas. And that's the little video there for us, friends, produced again by Michael Hurst of the BBC. We appreciate that, Michael. This next video shows captured Ukrainian soldiers.
The government is coming under pressure from all sides, from pro-Russian militants and possibly Russian forces in the east to angry Ukrainians closer to home. These images show the town of Ilovaisk. Ukrainian soldiers held the town, a key transport hub, but were encircled by rebel forces. They were shelled mercilessly, and casualties were high. Among the rebels, the Ukrainians say, were Russian forces. The Ukrainians were promised safe passage to evacuate. But when they left at the weekend, they say they were ambushed. Maybe as many as 100 died. The rebels deny this.
The convoy of the Ukrainian army was captured. Their tanks, vehicles, everything was taken away. The purpose of this convoy was to take away the injured from Ilovaisk, as we were told, but there were too many military vehicles and too many armed men. That's why both convoys were surrounded and were captured basically without fighting.
But the Ukrainians claim it was a war crime.
They were given the corridor to get out. Nobody was, well, they were shot. They were given the corridor to exit and they were shot. It's a violation of international conventions. We came now, but we don't know how it will end.
Reports say that hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers may have been taken captive. These images show some of the POWs. The pictures come from the rebels, but they clearly show abuses. A soldier is hit. Others are humiliated. And they are told they will be subject to forced labor. Some of the prisoners have reportedly been released, but the fate of others is unknown. Reports of what happened in Ilovaisk and its aftermath are now only beginning to filter out. Anger is rising at the rebels and at the government, who people say abandoned the forces. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has promised changes to the military. But the question is, can he make them fast enough? David Stern, BBC News, Kiev.
Okay, thank you, David. And I have another report by David. However, I think this last one he gave really kind of says that story pretty well. Let's go to the next story we have tonight. This one related to the Great Escape. The last remaining British survivor of the Great Escape, the Great Escape team, has died at age 93. Flight Lieutenant Ken Rees spent much of World War II as a prisoner and was part of the legendary escape from Stalag Luft III camp. He was the last man pulled from the tunnel during the escape when the tunnel was discovered by a guard. Mr. Rees had been credited as the inspiration for Steve McQueen's character in the film of the escape, although he always denied this. Rodri Lewis has this very interesting World War II related report about this man who just died, aged 93.
Survivors of the Great Escape, meeting for one of their final reunions 10 years ago. Among them, Ken Rees. Originally from Rwabon near Wrexham, the former airman had been living in Rosniger on Anglesey. Ken Rees had been a farmer before joining up as a bomber pilot. He flew more than 50 missions before being shot down over Norway in 1942.
3 of us survived and managed to get to the shore, and 2 were killed. In walked what appeared to be 3/4 of the German army, mixture of Gestapo and Luftwaffe, and they announced the usual thing, "For you the war is over," they said, and we were prisoners from then on.
Ken ended up in the notorious Stalag Luft 3 camp. He played a central role in the legendary tunnel escape from there in 1944. Part of the reason he was recruited is because his colleagues thought that, as a Welshman, he must have known something about mining. He's also said to have been the inspiration for Steve McQueen's character, Cooler King Hilt, in the film The Great Escape, but he himself wasn't convinced.
He's tall and I'm not, and I'm heavier than he is, and he's an American and I'm a Welshman. The only thing in common, really, was both annoyed the Germans, and we both finished off doing stretches in the cooler. That is all. I mean, I didn't get out, and if I did, I wouldn't have been able to ride a motorbike anyway.
76 men got out of the camp, but only 3 made it home. 50 were shot following a direct order from Hitler himself. Ken was luckier. He was halfway down the tunnel when it was discovered, and he had to scramble back. 70 years on, the deeds of Ken Rees and his colleagues still resonate, but that pride is tinged with sadness as another war hero passes on.
And friends, that was related to World War II, or as Mr. Armstrong well puts it, round 2 of World War. We're simply in a recess between round 2 and round 3, Mr. Armstrong often said. And you know, round 3 will happen during the 5th seal, which you can see if you count 5 columns over here. We've got a chart depicting the 6 seals that are mentioned in Revelation 6. There's 7 seals in all, of course, but Revelation 6 mentions the first 6 of them. The 5th one being the Great Tribulation, which is, as Mr. Herbert Armstrong explained it, the next major event to happen in prophecy. Right now, the first 4 seals are active, the white, red, black, and pale horses, and the next thing is the Great Tribulation. It's the time of round 3 of World War. It's the time of a revived Holy Roman Empire, a time of the coming together of 10 nations when they give their power to what the Bible calls the beast, which will be the emperor and his image of the revived Holy Roman Empire, who will be crowned in a coronation ceremony in Frankfurt, Germany, with the Pope present, placing the crown of the old Holy Roman Empire on the head, figuratively and or literally. It's a rather heavy crown. I've seen it in Vienna in the Royal Treasury there some years back when I took a train from France. After being in Israel for a couple of months, I flew on over to France and then took a train from France through Germany and into Vienna, and then went into the Royal Treasury with my camera, took some pictures, and then when I was on my way out, I complained to the guard that, hey, the sign said that can't use flash to take pictures. Hard to get a good picture in that light in there without flash. He says, you can't take pictures in there at all, buddy. He said, if you take any pictures, we'll confiscate your camera. So I sealed my lips because I had already taken some time, exposure pictures with my camera, but I didn't say enough to reveal that to the guard. I got to walk out of there with my camera, and I have those pictures, 35 millimeter slides of that that gawky, big jeweled crown of the Holy Roman Empire, which figuratively or literally or both will be worn again in the future when this fifth seal becomes active as the Great Tribulation, when the beast comes into power by 10 nations or regions that give their power to this beast out of Europe, most likely an Assyrian German emperor, who again, they've always been crowned in the past, friends, in the Emperor's Hall in Frankfurt, Germany. Now, the Allies bombed that Emperor's Hall toward the end of World War II, but good old Uncle Sam and the Marshall Plan helped rebuild that bombed building, the Emperor's Hall, according to the old architectural drawings, but with more modern materials. And that building is there. Right now it houses portraits and statues of all the emperors from the past many years of the Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. And that building is ready to be used for its last time as the final emperor, the seventh head of the old Holy Roman Empire. Seventh and final head. And Daniel pictures it with as 10 toes, of 5 of clay and 5 of iron, 5 of, and the two don't mix. They won't get along, but they'll join together because of some crisis, maybe the Ukraine, maybe the Islamic State crisis, that will push them together. And Mr. Armstrong, as he explained it, there are 3 elements necessary for that beast to really, when you see these 3 elements come together, that'll be just what the beast needs to operate. One is a political union. Now, that's been underway for the last decade and a half. And a monetary union. That's been underway since 1999, when the euro was first circulated as a bookkeeping function, and then a year or 2 later they actually began printing the money, coining the euro, and circulating the euro bills, and went through a struggle, economic struggle with it, but they seem to be recovering nicely thanks to the discipline and diligence of Germany, which has something at stake in this. They want to be the head of this, and they've got many people obligated to them now because of bailing them out of financial situations as they struggle to get in line with the euro financial policy. I said there are 3 elements. I mentioned 2 of them, the monetary and the political. They also need a military union. And the type of crises that are happening now with Ukraine, and many stories, I got a couple coming up tonight, the past few days, it's been being mentioned that Russia is at war with Europe, and this kind of crisis can cause the parties of Europe to say, hey, NATO's not really going to do it. We need our own military. So then the third element necessary for that union to come together will be put in place, a military union. A very big and large and powerful military union that will be bigger and stronger than that of the United States or Russia. And Ezekiel 6:6, that we've mentioned several times, friends, tells us that if the people of God, God's people, the tribes of Israel, those in the modern day descendants in the U.S., those of Manasseh, and in the UK, those of Ephraim, if we don't repent of our sins, our disobedience to our Creator, God says in Ezekiel 6:6, He will lay waste the cities of Israel, of the U.S. and the UK. And He'll do it in a very powerful way through nuclear bombs sent over by Europe, by the head of this new European Union, which will become the beast power. And again, that's part of the 5th seal. We'll put the chart back up quickly. We'll get back to news stories. We got a lot of news tonight. We're going longer than usual tonight, friends. But next thing in prophecy, that 5th seal, the Great Tribulation, the time of World War III. And so that's why that story from World War II really relates. That was just round 2 of a world war that's just in a recess for now, and that will continue, be revived in the very near future. One of the things that leads up to the 5th seal is in this chart. There's 4 seals. There's religious deception. We've got a worldwide religious order in effect. That's represented by the white horse, the first seal. The second seal, depicted in Revelation as a red horse that Jesus Christ described in plain language as war and rumors of war. News story after news story. Every night you tune in, we have more war stories of war to go yet tonight. They're true and real stories. That's why instead of saying war stories, I don't say, stories of war, real stories, real war. And the third seal, famine. And this next news story relates to famine and pale horse, which is not only disease epidemics, there's some news on that tonight too, but seismic activity, commotions in the air, commotions on the ground. We opened with a story about the Bardarbunga volcano and its ash, and it's spewing and then going quiet and then spewing again, and who knows, that thing could erupt very big soon. But let's focus for a moment, because of our next story, on both the third and the fourth seal. The black horse of famine, the pale horse of seismic, disease epidemic and seismic activity. In the news tonight are a couple of stories that relate to drought in the United States. I've got one coming up after this related to big water shortage, water problem in Detroit, but in the state of Texas, there's an extraordinary Texas drought that leaves a big lake there all dry.
Lake Arrowhead in North Texas. As you can see, I don't need scuba gear. Texas has been experiencing drought for years, and this area is part of the state that is in exceptional drought. You can see the mud baked on the lake bottom. You can see what used to be here, clams. You might just be able to make out what remains of the water behind me. It's only 25% full. There's a little bit of a puddle over there. They are experiencing extraordinary drought in Texas. It's really beginning to bite in terms of the agriculture and in terms of the people that live here. And if you just come over here a little bit, you can see the depth that used to be here. This is a boardwalk and a jetty where people normally would have been fishing off the edge of it. And if you look up a little bit, you can see a sign that says no boats within 100 feet. It really is getting dry here.
For that report, as you can see from that report, friends, an ongoing drought in Texas, which began during a record dry year in 2010, has led to a stark change in the U.S. state's landscape and the livelihoods of its inhabitants. Ranchers have sold off a fifth of the state's cattle herd after pasture dried up. Crop yields are down, and the cost of feed has grown increasingly expensive. I have a horse, a donkey, and a couple of goats, and I can bear witness to that. The feed in the food stores just continues to rise. Tom Heap visited Lake Arrowhead in North Texas and provided that report, which Texas there contains only a quarter of the water. That lake in Texas contains only a quarter of the water that it would have at full capacity. Visitors can stroll across the bed of that lake. You can hear more on Tom's journey to parched Texas in BBC Radio 4's Costing the Earth, which ran today on Radio 4, and they have it where you can listen to the whole thing online. Now, another story, friends, relates to water problem out of another U.S. city, that of Detroit, Michigan. Residents in the debt-hit U.S. city of Detroit have been waiting for water to be reconnected in their homes, and in some cases have spent days without supplies. The water company is owed more than $80 million and says it cannot afford such a large amount of unpaid bills. But you'll see in this video they're turning some of the water back on for people.
This is a scene that is beginning to play out on many streets in Detroit. Workers are turning people's water back on.
Up and we're saying no.
No one expects to be talking about the lack of water in a major American city, especially one that sits next to such a large source of fresh water. But such are the harsh times that have befallen Detroit. The once prosperous home to America's auto industry is now known for being the largest city to ever file for bankruptcy.
Abandoned homes litter many neighborhoods. At its peak in the 1950s, 1.8 million people lived in Detroit. Roughly only 700,000 remain. Of those, almost half live in poverty, and many struggle for water.
Jobs are gone. We're barely making it as it is. The government has cut pensions, paychecks, and everything else. And now you're going to take the one thing that we need to really sustain life.
Sonia Brown is giving away water from her home so people without can get some for free. It's a sign that even as Detroit's infrastructure crumbles, its sense of community has not. Now the city is waiting for the courts to do their part and approve a new financial plan so Detroit can begin to rebuild. Samira Hussein, BBC News, Detroit.
Friends, Detroit filed for bankruptcy in July 2013 and hopes to cut its current debt bill of $12 billion to a more manageable $5 billion. That was Samira Hussein reporting on the day-to-day struggles of people living in Detroit as the city attempts to climb out of its financial problems. And friends, even if Detroit pulls out of its financial problems, if the drought situation in the country, if God allows that to continue, and I'll explain why he will or will not in a moment. We've been talking about that some last night. But if that is allowed to continue, the drought situation, even if people have money to pay the bills, if there's no water in the faucet, then that's going to be the result of, as we've been reading from Leviticus 26, verse 19, and all of Leviticus 26 and all of Deuteronomy 28, the two chapters that relate to the blessings and cursings, where God tells us that if we obey our Creator, then He will bless us. He'll make our agriculture grow richly because He'll send an abundance of rain. He'll make us the head, not the tail, as a people, as a nation. And then, of course, the blessings on your agriculture are both national and individual. And he says, nationally, as a nation, if you obey, if the majority of the people are obeying, 5 of you will chase 100 of your enemies, 100 of you will put 10,000 to flight. I'll make you the lender, not the borrower. But friends, we obviously are not obeying our Creator, because he says, on the other hand, if you don't obey me, I'll make you the borrower, not the lender. And the United States, everybody knows it keeps having to raise its debt ceiling and borrow more money. So we're under a curse. And if we still don't get it, God says, I'll punish you 7 times more. And then eventually verse 19 of Leviticus 26, where God says, I'll break the pride of your power. And we're beginning to see that happen. Some of the news stories later tonight will bring that out. But one more story, friends, that's related to the element of this 4th seal that mentions the disease epidemics, loimus, as Jesus Christ described it in the Greek language that the gospel writers wrote it up in. And that's in the news tonight from Mexico, where Mexico is probing a mass fish death in one of their big lakes there in this news story from today.
It's a big haul, but no one's going to eat these fish. Boat after boat pulls into shore, all with the same sad, stinking cargo. More than 50 tons of dead popoche chub have already been removed from Lake Cajititlan, but no one can agree on why so many have died. The local authorities blame the deaths simply on the natural cycle, but the fishermen blame pollution.
We're facing an environmental hazard because of the appearance of thousands of fish in the lake that died mainly because of the lack of oxygen at the bottom of the lake. I think that the evidence highlights that the pollution in the lake is advancing severely, and I believe that the authorities should act on this.
The possible culprits are many. The local sewage treatment works is one, excessive use of fertilizers by farmers is another. Some have pointed the finger at waste from a nearby tequila distillery. Officials say human health hasn't been endangered, which is just as well for the fishermen here left to remove lorry loads of fish. Bill Hayton, BBC News.
Okay, thank you, Bill Hayton. And friends, related to that story, I've got a couple of scriptures. Now, as you heard in this report, a lot of the potential for this, or blame for the problems there in that lake in Mexico, relate to some saying it's part of a natural cycle. Others are blaming pollution, possibly from farmers or even the local tequila distillery, as you heard in this report. It's the fourth reported case of dead fish being found this year in that lake in the state of Jalisco in Mexico. And now, friends, these couple of scriptures that I'm going to put on the screen next from Revelation 8 are actually talking about a time during the seventh seal. Now, if I put our chart up on the screen, here are the first 6 seals, but if we go to the full chart, you see there's 7 seals in all, and the 7th seal has got such activity to it. It takes up more than half of the right side of the page. It takes up more area than all 6 of the first 6 seals take, because that 7th seal, the 7th seal itself consists of 7 trumpets, and then the seventh trumpet consists of 7 last plagues. So that's 7 seal, and that's why it's called 777 on that last seal. The 7th seal has 7 trumpets, and the 7th trumpet has 7 last plagues to it. And Revelation 8 is going to relate to this 7th seal, which happens after the 144,000 are sealed, as you can see in the middle of this chart, happens after the heavenly signs. It happens after the Great Tribulation, which is the 5th seal. And the Great Tribulation is still under the day of Satan and man, and that's Great Tribulation is part of Satan's wrath. Some confuse that and think, oh, that's God's wrath during the Great Tribulation. No, the Great Tribulation is part of the day of man and Satan. It's Satan's wrath. He tries to go up to heaven and conquer God on his throne a second time. This will be the second time he'll do that. He gets thrown back down to the earth again, and he's angry knowing his time is short. He comes after God's people, but some of God's people are going to be accounted worthy to escape. I hope you are one of those. But a remnant's going to be left behind during the Great Tribulation. That Great Tribulation hasn't come yet. That the church that will be left behind, which is part of the other church, the church is one church, but there are different eras of it. And the era that goes to a place of protection, that is accounted worthy to escape, once it's gone, then, even though another church may be here in attitude and may be well-forming already, there's still time, if you've got that attitude that God calls lukewarm, there's still time to repent of that. And you can still be a part of the Philadelphia era. But if you are part of that church and you stay in your lukewarm and stay lukewarm, you'll be left behind. And then when that era starts, when the 5th seal starts, too late to be accounted worthy to escape, but you can still repent as God will come and tell you and ask you and knock on your heart to do. He'll say, look, repent of your lukewarmness and hang in there. Your only way out of this is to go through martyrdom. And I was a martyr. I was crucified for you. I gave my life. And if you'll repent, get hot, and stay with it to the end and go through the martyrdom, you'll sup at my marriage table. All right, that's really a subject. We give you news related to the Bible and prophecy, but it's a subject I go into much more on the weekends and play sermons and broadcast by Mr. Herbert Armstrong, through whom God explained all of this to us, through whom God gave us these truths, and we should recognize that and recognize that God was using this man as more than just a man. He was using him as an apostle. But the seventh seal, that's the day of the Lord. That's the seventh seal. The day of the Lord is not the fifth seal, the Great Tribulation. That's just the point that I wanted to make. And then let me switch back to our regular chart and then come on out of here and show you these couple of scriptures I have that relate to the day of the Lord thing. But it's this story from Mexico with the fish made me think of these couple of verses, one of them in Revelation 8, verse 8, where it says, and the second angel, and this is part of one of the angels sounding during the trumpets of the seventh seal, and the second angel sounded as it were a great mountain burning with fire, which cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. And verse 9, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. Now that's a future thing, during the seventh seal, during the day of the Lord, during the day of the Lord. And that happens in the sea. But this story, friends, is kind of from Mexico and their lake there. It's kind of a type of what's coming in the future. And as all those fish dying, it gives you an idea of what that can be like. Now, this story from today's news is limited to a lake in Mexico. Can you imagine, though, when this is happening worldwide? In the oceans. That's going to be a terribly stinking time, a time of death, a time of great, great death. All right, I've got one or two more stories to you. I said we're going a little bit longer tonight. Friends, in this next story out of Japan, it relates to this fourth seal in the sense of disease epidemics that Jesus Christ mentioned using the Greek word loimus, meaning disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt. In a park in Japan, there's a fear of an outbreak. Japan is battling the first outbreak of dengue fever in almost 70 years, with at least 22 people confirmed as being infected.
So this is the main entrance to Yoyogi Park, and it's really one of the nicest, probably the nicest and biggest old park in the middle of Tokyo, and it's a real haven for people here from this enormous city. But you can see this is now the epicenter of this dengue fever outbreak, and there's a sign here on the gate in Japanese, below it in English. It says, danger, warning, wear long sleeves, avoid showing skin, avoid wearing sandals and bare feet, use bug spray. It doesn't actually say anywhere on here the reason, but we all know it's because of the dengue fever. So this is probably where the dengue fever outbreak began. A few days ago, these ponds would have been filled with water. It's been a very wet summer here in Tokyo, lots of places for mosquitoes to breed. And so you can see they've completely drained the ponds. There's been a huge spraying operation going on here the last few days, and that's to eradicate the mosquitoes, because dengue fever is passed by mosquitoes from one human to another, and the only way to control it is to eradicate the mosquito population. I don't think people here are really scared of this outbreak. I mean, you can see there is already a lot of people back in the park here, but they are shocked because the last recorded case of dengue fever anywhere in Japan was 70 years ago, back at the end of the Second World War. This is a disease that people here thought was gone forever. This is
You know, the middle of one of the biggest cities in the world. It's not a place you expect to go to the park at lunchtime or go for a jog in the morning and be bitten by a mosquito and potentially get what can be, in some cases, a fatal disease. People usually think of dengue fever as being a disease of the tropics, of being from Southeast Asia or Africa, but dengue fever has been rapidly spreading out of those areas over the last 40 years, further north and further south from the equator, and it is reaching countries again, like Japan. And the reason for that, well, is twofold. The first is that people are just travelling more and carrying this disease with them, and the second is conditions for it to spread. Hot, wet summers are also becoming more and more common.
Okay, thank you, Rupert Wingfield Hayes, reporting from Japan. The health industry there said the patients were believed to have contracted the virus from a mosquito in the park where Rupert Wingfield Hayes was, in Tokyo's popular Yoyogi Park. And Rupert Wingfield Hayes was telling us how the virus is spread there. Now, there's one more story related, again, to this fourth seal, the disease epidemics that we have for you tonight. The dramatic recapture of an Ebola patient in Liberia has been caught on camera after he escaped from a quarantine center.
The scene at this market in Liberia's capital, Monrovia, tells an ominous tale. The man in red has tested positive for the Ebola virus. The tag on his arm identifies him as a patient at a quarantine centre. But when he escaped and arrived at this market in search of food, he sent the crowd fleeing. The patient is from Monrovia's Elwa hospital, which was so crowded last month that it had to turn away Ebola patients. Doctors arrive and plead with him to go back to the ward. Just 2 weeks ago, a mob broke into an Ebola centre, destroying equipment and releasing some patients. And here again, complaints about the government of President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf.
The patients are hungry, they're starving, no food and no water. The government needs to do more. Let Ellen do more.
The president has tried to answer her critics. She threatened officials with dismissal for failing to report for work, and she's announced plans to build 5 new Ebola treatment centres. In this case, healthcare workers eventually forced the patients into an ambulance and back to the hospital. But some here believe this won't be the last scare they have.
We told the Liberian government from the beginning we do not want an Ebola camp here. Today makes it the 5th Ebola patient coming outside vomiting and going to the toilet.
This, the worst outbreak in history, has killed more than 1,500 people and infected thousands more across 4 countries. Liberia has the highest infection rate, and as the death toll continues to rise, so do the fears of a community. Lebutiseko, BBC News.
Friends, as we go into our last stories tonight to finish up, we're going back to Japan with Rupert Wingfield Hayes, where in this next story, India's new Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, is meeting his Japanese counterpart, Shinzo Abe, in Tokyo to discuss economic and security ties on his first major foreign visit since winning May's election. And just a reminder, friends, you know, we are told, God tells us to pray for the leaders around the world, and we should know who they are and be following that instruction to pray for them. That's one of the instructions God gave us, in addition to the instruction Christ gave us in Luke 21:36, telling us to watch news that relate to these first 4 seals and be an active part of the news, praying about the news. And if you do, then when the 5th seal comes, the next, as we pointed out earlier, it's the next major thing in prophecy to happen, that 5th seal, the time of the Third World War and a revived Holy Roman Empire and a great martyrdom of God's saints. You can be accounted worthy to escape that 5th seal if you're watching these first 4 and praying about them. And part of that involves knowing, again, who the world leaders are and praying about them and their activities. In this next story, Mr. Moody, who's on a 5-day trip to Japan for the purpose of strengthening economic ties with the third largest economy in the world. Let's watch this story.
Japanese leaders don't usually welcome foreign dignitaries with a bear hug. But for Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Narendra Modi is not just some other foreign guest. The fact that the Indian Prime Minister has come here to Japan for his first major foreign visit is hugely significant. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has said that he thinks Japan and India are natural allies and should be much closer, not just economically, but politically and militarily. The two prime ministers are reported to have great personal admiration for each other. The Japanese media has been making much of the fact that Mr. Modi is one of only 3 people that Prime Minister Abe follows on Twitter. Both men are modernizing nationalists, and both are deeply wary of the rising power of China. So while he is here, Prime Minister Modi will discuss buying Japanese high-speed trains and Japanese nuclear technology and billions of dollars of new Japanese investment. But he will also talk about buying Japanese military technology and about the Japanese and Indian navies holding regular joint exercises. Supporters of Mr. Abe say it's sensible that he should seek an alliance with India to counterbalance the growing power of China. His critics say a Tokyo-Delhi axis will only make Japan's already disastrous relations with China even worse. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Tokyo.
So, friends, one of the things, as you heard, they're going to be talking about is, how they can cooperate with their nuclear power things and in defense, militarily as well. Friends, I've got just time to show you this one last little story that I believe is uplifting out of, where are we coming from on this? I think this is out of India. Or no, Uganda. Uganda's ghetto kids are in step with life-changing dance project. Watch this one. I think you'll like it. Oops, let me get it right to the end on that last one. Oh, I hope we haven't hung up. This is a great little story if it's going to play. Let's see what happens here. Ooh, looks like maybe it hung up on us. Hang on, let's see if I can get it. Well, we lost it. Well, friends, so maybe we'll have that one tomorrow night for you, or sometime later this week. That's it, friends, for this longer version Tuesday night edition of Nightcast. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow evening, Wednesday evening, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy. Be praying about these events, friends, and until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying, good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.